Tensions between the US and China have spilled over into one of the world's biggest sporting events. Beijing is threatening to retaliate after Washington announced a diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics. It's calling the move a plot that's doomed to fail. Live to our correspondents in Beijing and Washington in just a moment, but first a look at where matters stand.
From the testing of competition venues to the training of athletes, preparations are in full swing as China gears up to host the Winter Olympics in February. But American officials will not be present to witness the thrills and spills. The US has declared a diplomatic boycott of the Games to protest China's alleged human rights abuses. It comes just a few weeks after the country's leaders held a virtual meeting. But the White House says American athletes are still free to compete.
We will be behind them 100% as we cheer them on from home, but we will not be contributing to the fanfare of the Games. U.S. diplomatic or official representation would treat these Games as business as usual in the face of the PRC's egregious human rights abuses and atrocities in Xinjiang, and we simply can't do that.
China has dismissed the move, saying no one cares if the U.S. attends or not. It says there will be no impact on the success of the Winter Games. Still, Beijing has condemned Washington's actions, saying there will be a price to pay.
美方做法严重违背奥林匹克宪章确立的体育运动政治中立原则，同更团结的奥林匹克格言背道而驰。 站在了全世界广大运动员和体育爱好者的对立面。
Residents are also unfazed.
这个就是完全上升到就是污蔑和诽谤嘛。
我觉得肯定不会对北京冬奥会的那个成功举办产生影响。不会因为某一个国家，就算是它是一个超级大国的缺席或者不参加来会影响到我们整个冬奥会的那个成功举办。
High-level government representatives from foreign countries are usually present at the Olympics. But politics aside, their attendance at the upcoming Winter Games remains a question mark as China keeps up a strict zero-tolerance approach to COVID-19.
And Olivia Xiong joins us live. Olivia, we just heard that China's Minister of Foreign Affairs, that angry response. What can we expect next?
Well, you know, we've seen Chinese officials, several of them hitting back at this U.S. move. China clearly angered by this confirmation of a diplomatic boycott by the U.S. And what we have heard from China's foreign ministry is that it is vowing to take resolute countermeasures in light of this diplomatic boycott. Now, China has not explicitly stated what these countermeasures could entail, but when pressed, the foreign ministry did say that the U.S. would, quote, pay the price for its wrongdoings, with a spokesperson telling the media to stay tuned. Now, according to some observers that I've spoken to, they say that potential countermeasures could include sanctions on officials, politicians, U.S. organizations, as well as businesses as well. Now, the U.S. has cited alleged human rights atrocities in China as the reason for this diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics, this including alleged genocide in Xinjiang, something that China has repeatedly denied. Instead, we have seen the Chinese foreign ministry sort of move to discredit the U.S. boycott, saying that U.S. officials had not even been invited to the Games yet. Have a listen.
美方出于意识形态偏见，基于谎言、谣言，试图干扰北京冬奥会，这只会 让人看清美方的险恶用心。在未收到邀请情况下，美方把是否派政府官员出席同所谓新疆人权问题挂钩，这完全是颠倒黑白、错上加错、自欺欺人。美方的政治图谋不得人心，也注定失败。
Now, China has also accused the U.S. of violating the Olympic spirit, saying that sport should be politically neutral. And it also said that the Olympics is not the place for there to be political manipulation.
Oliver, you have seen this happen several times before between China and the US, China and the EU, China and Australia. Those countries or regions making a move, whether on Hong Kong or Xinjiang, and China responding angrily. This time around, where does this leave China-US ties?
Well, this diplomatic boycott has been linked by China to the broader Sino-US relationship, and China has called on the U.S. to stop disrupting the Winter Olympics. And as it says, it may harm bilateral dialogue and cooperation in important areas, as well as in regional and international issues. This comes just about 3 weeks after that virtual meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden. That meeting had sought to dial down the tensions between these two superpowers. But clearly, this is difficult. China has also been angered by what it sees as the U.S. trying to rally other countries to counter its rise. And we have heard the U.S. State Department say that U.S. allies could announce its decisions on a potential boycott as well in the coming days and weeks. And we do know that Canada and Australia, they are also mulling their position as well. But the foreign ministry, when asked about this, because we had heard also that New Zealand will not be sending diplomatic representatives at the ministerial level to the Winter Olympics, although it has said that this is due to COVID-19 reasons. When asked about this, the foreign ministry said that the spotlight of the games is on the athletes, and whether or not politicians turn up at the games, that doesn't matter to China, as it says this will not impact the success of the games that's to be held by Beijing.
And thanks for that, Olivia. Olivia's on live for us there in Beijing.
Right, and let's turn to Simon Marks now for more on Washington's perspective. Simon, this diplomatic boycott, the U.S. had been under mounting domestic pressure for months now to make such a move, and they finally did.
And they also conveyed to the Chinese that this move was coming before it was announced. So the United States is taking some of that public criticism from China in its stride, because the Biden administration says much of that they believe is designed for domestic consumption within China. They insist that the Chinese authorities were given advance notice that this decision was coming, and indeed it had been widely reported here over the last couple of weeks that it was only a matter of time before the White House confirmed this diplomatic boycott. It's been broadly welcomed by the human rights community here in the United States, but there are Republican voices, plenty of them, saying that while the White House on the one hand is saying it mustn't be business as usual in Beijing in February, they argue that the United States is still to some considerable degree engaged in business as usual. And Republicans are saying that the Biden administration should go further. Some of them want to see the American Olympic team entirely withdrawn from the Winter Olympics, and they are calling for American businesses that sponsor the Games to be banned from doing that legally. That would be very complicated terrain for the Biden administration to navigate, even if they wanted to. One big question being asked here is, what will the impact of all of this be on America's allies, who were also given advance notice that this move was coming? How many of them will engage in a diplomatic boycott of the Games themselves? And one country definitely worth keeping an eye on is Italy, because it's due to host the next Winter Olympics in 2026, and under normal circumstances would send emissaries to Beijing to receive, to be there for essentially the baton being passed to Italy ahead of the next Winter Olympic Games. What will they and other European countries do as a result of President Biden's decision? Washington is waiting to see.
Well, those questions we'll be putting to a guest later on our show. But separately, Simon, Washington is talking diplomacy with another major power, Russia.
Just under 3 hours away. The first virtual face-to-face meeting between President Joe Biden and President Vladimir Putin, very similar in format to the virtual summit that was held last month between President Biden and President Xi. And just as that meeting was overshadowed by Taiwan, this one is going to be overshadowed by Ukraine. The United States says that the president wants to try and get a clear understanding of Vladimir Putin's intentions towards Ukraine. Does he plan any kind of military incursion across the Ukrainian border using those armed forces from Russia that are massed along the border? The White House insists that President Biden wants to engage with President Putin. This is not, they say, going to be a moment for a rhetorical flourish or finger wagging, and questioned repeatedly over the last few hours about what the United States will do if Russia does invade Ukraine. Will that spark a military response? US officials say they're not going to make that threat because it would be precipitous saber rattling. So they are definitely here in a mood to try and damp down the rhetoric as those talks approach. Other issues on the agenda as well, of course, democracy, human rights, the familiar list, but it's Ukraine that's going to overshadow this conversation.
Simon Marks, good talking to you. Simon Marks there speaking to us from Washington.